Hello and welcome to the short video for Introduction to Philosophy, Class 21. As always, the class can be done, at your convenience because it's asynchronous. And as I'm recording this, this is Monday, June 17th, so just a few days left. And be sure to complete all the stuff before the final deadlines. So the content for Class 21 is all about deontology and our good dead friend Immanuel Kant's theory, the categorical imperative. Deontology comes from the Greek word deon, meaning duty, not like howdy doody or, duty, but duty like in, obligation. And the particular version we're looking at is what's called rule deontology. And so that's the view that the what is right and wrong is determined by the correct set of moral rules. And so a deontologist has to tell you what are the correct rules? What are these rules that define morality? As you might imagine, some forms of religious ethics involve rule-based ethics. So, for example, if you have an ethics based on the 10 Commandments, those would be the rules, and following those rules would be correct on that view. Kant's view, as we'll see, he's got a rule for making more rules, which gives it a greater degree of flexibility because when you're in a scenario where you're like, what do I do? You have a rule for making more rules. And a challenge of having a fixed set of rules is either when new stuff comes up, either you've got to add new rules and justify them, or you have to reinterpret the rules or just be at a loss to not know what is good and bad. So Kant's moral theory. So his core moral principle is the categorical imperative. And Kant, in terms of putting him into various categories, obviously rule deontologist, so it's about following the rules. He's also a moral absolutist, typically interpreted that way, that there's only one correct moral answer to each moral problem, and there are not exceptions. He argues against utilitarianism, argues against virtue theory, not because he thinks people should be bad, but in the sense that whenever you're building a moral theory, you've got to support your moral theory against the competition. It's like any, to use an economic analogy, it's like coming up with a new product. You've got to say why yours is better than the competition. So his categorical imperative is this. It's that if you're trying to decide what to do, you must act on the maxim whereby thou canst, at the same time, will the corresponding universal law. So what's going on there? So very quickly, the maxim is when you give yourself permission to do something that's self-interested. Roughly put, you give yourself permission to do something you want to do. And then the moral test is you have to consider whether you can will both your maxim, that I can do this, while at the same time willing the universal law that not that everyone will do it, but everyone could do it. And Kant's, he gives some examples of this when setting it up. And one example is the case of lying promises. And so the moral question is, okay, suppose I need money, but I know I can't pay it back. Now, in that case, if I go to the bank and say, hey, I need some money, I can't pay it back, and I'm honest, they're generally not going to give me money. So suppose I consider, what if I lie, go to the bank and lie about being able to pay it back to get the money? Now, Kant says there's a matter of prudence and practicality, which is how likely am I to get away with this? If I don't, what are the consequences of getting caught? But he thinks that those questions of consequences are questions not of morality, but again, questions of practicality. So if I ask the question, should I do this, out of concerns of whether I get caught or not, I'm not being ethical. So what is the moral test for him? Well, what I have to do is this. I take my maxim, when I need money and I can't pay it back, I can lie. And then I have to consider, the universal law. Basically, I'm imagining doing some sci-fi, where I'm imagining another world just like ours, except the moral rule is everyone can lie, specifically to get money. Now, Kant thinks this maximum would be sabotage, would contradict making it universal law for the following reason. I want to lie to get an advantage, but if everyone can lie, if lying is just the order of the day, lying becomes, effectively useless, unless, laying aside, like, maybe if I'm like really, really good at lying. It's similar to like, you could do the same thing with like cheating in sports or a game. Because if everyone's cheating, then cheating is no longer advantageous, unless, of course, you're really good at cheating. And so that's his first formulation of the categorical imperative. That's the test. Crudely put, it's, I can do this, it's morally okay, if I am rationally willing to let everyone do this too. And again, it's not that everyone must do it or everyone will do it, but everyone could do it. Because if we went with, what if everyone did this, then so many things would be, turned out to be immoral. So, like, what if everyone decided to become, a doctor? Well, that would be obviously, bad, because if everyone's a doctor, no one's doing anything else. There'd be no anesthesiologists, there'd be no nurses, there'd be no engineers, there'd be no teachers, there'd be, nobody else. And so it's not that everyone would do this, it's that everyone could do this. Now, Kant, of course, being Kant, gives some examples of how he thinks this theory applies, lying promises, the letting your talents rust, etc. And he picks examples, as you'll see if you look at the videos, that are taken out of Christianity, and claims his theory applies to all those cases. Critics, disagree a bit. And so Kant also does some more versions of the categorical imperative. Kant is well known for saying, like, hey, there's this other thing that seems totally different, but trust me, they're both the same. And people who support him say people who don't see it, just not as smart as Kant. So a second formulation is you have to treat rational beings, in yourself and as others, as ends and not just as means. Roughly put, you can't treat people just as things or objects, you have to treat them as people. And Kant splits reality into objects, things that are just things with no moral status, and rational beings, you and I, that have moral status. And he thinks that, this version of the categorical imperative requires us to treat rational beings as ends. It doesn't mean that you can never treat people as means, that you can never go to like, Publix and get, have someone bag your groceries, etc. It's just that you can't treat them just as a means. Now, then he goes to his final formulation, which is the rational beings are the legislatures of the kingdom of ends. So he talks about, this categorical imperative, and most people put him in the rule deontologist. So who are the lawmakers, the rule makers? And the answer is us. We're part of this kingdom of ends. Again, we don't have we don't have a passport there. You can't go there, and find the capital of it. But we're all members of this because as rational beings, according to Kant, we're all using his method, so he claims, and so we're all the lawmakers. And the reason for this, he thinks that if we have morality imposed on us from the outside, then we're not acting morally. We're forced, which is why when it comes to religious view of ethics, even though Kant clearly is influenced, because he brings in like the Good Samaritan and etc. and rusting talents, he doesn't accept divine command theory in large part for that reason. So that's a super quick run through of Kant. More detail, of course, in the videos. Now, deontology, of course, does have various problems. If it was, the one true moral view, I would just say, hey, deontology, this is the correct view, all moral problems solved. And there are a variety of problems with deontology. Some arise from the absolutism, the usual problems there. Others arise from, questions about, well, what is it, kind of like interpretation questions. What does it mean to treat beings as ends? And how do you reconcile, moral conflicts between, matters of interest and people if everyone is a moral end? And how do you do that kind of stuff? And then there were questions about how do you actually, do the whole, maximum universal law thing. And there's people who bring up various, things that seem, say, reasonable to allow that then don't pass this test, or things that seem horrible but then seem to pass this test. So, not surprisingly, lots of criticism of Kant and Kant's view. For the readings and files, if you haven't got those yet, notes, readings, paper guide. And then for the coursework for this, is the quiz 22 on Deontology and Kant. As always, it's got a due date, available until date. In this case, they're the same. Worth 5 points, 5 questions, 5 minutes. Also, if you're listening to this on June 17th, the emergency deadline for the paper is June 18th. So tomorrow, if you're listening to this on June 17th. And again, the emergency deadline it's not that going to the papers. So for the papers, the deadlines left are the emergency deadline, June 18th, and then the 50% deadline, June 20th. And so for the paper, if you did turn in a paper for the +5 deadline, you don't have to do it again. You got your paper grade done. If you turn in a paper for the +5 deadline and you turn in another paper for the emergency deadline, if it's the same, you just get the same grade, but 5 points less for that. But then you'd keep your original grade, so no need to do that. If you turn in like in a new paper, then you wouldn't get the +5 bonus added to the new paper for the emergency deadline, but it would be regraded. And if it was better, you'd get the better score. If you didn't turn in a paper for the +5 deadline, there's a 0 there, which is working as intended. That's the way it's supposed to work. The emergency deadline, even though it's called emergency deadline, does not require like special permission or an excuse or anything. You can just use it. Again, it was originally designed because there was like the actual time the paper was due, but then people would have like computer problems or illnesses or work schedules or various other things, and so I was having to handle just people have to go get excuses or bring paperwork and do all this emails and etc. And just to make it simple for everybody, I just give everybody an extra week. So there's an actual paper dead when it's supposed to be done, and then everyone gets a no questions asked extra week to complete it. You don't have to ask for it, no excuses, no permission needed. If you haven't turned the paper already, you have until then to do so. There are the 3 deadlines of the paper, the +5, emergency 50% deadline, and Canvas automatically takes the best out of the 3. And again, you don't have to do all 3 of them because it's the best out of 3. So as long as you do 1, you get that as your grade. So probably needlessly complicated there. So that's the stuff for the paper, course stuff and stuff. So have a good rest of the day, and I'll see you in the future.